Good afternoon, everyone. I am City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Monday, April 11th, 2022, and we are here today for a virtual hearing on docket number 0187, petition for a special law regarding an act relative to reorganization of the Boston School Committee, referred to the committee on January 26, 2022. This docket was sponsored by myself and Councillor Julia Mejia in accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct their meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing remotely. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/citycounciltv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. If you wish to sign up for public comment and have not done so, you may email Christine O'Donnell at boston.gov for the link to do so, and your name will be added to the list. This afternoon, I'm joined by my council colleagues, Councillor Julia Mejia, Councillor Liz Braden, Councillor Lucy Louis-Nen, Council President Ed Flynn, Councillor Erin Murphy. This home rule petition would establish a transition from a fully appointed school committee to a fully elected school committee in the city of Boston, as currently written. The legislation takes a phased-in approach to the transition. The first phase would begin on September 6, 2022, and add a voting student member to the body. The second phase would begin on January 8, 2024, and would add 3 at-large school committee members to be elected in the 2023 municipal elections, who would serve alongside a student member, and 7 appointed committee members. And the final phase would begin on January 5th, 2026, and complete the transition to a fully elected 13-member school committee structure, all to be elected in the 2025 municipal election. This hearing is an opportunity for our veteran councilors to refresh their memories of the hearing held last year, and for new councilors to hear from residents and advocates. And I would also just state that all aspects of what I just said about the home rule petition and the phases and all of those different things are still open and editable. It's essentially a template for the working sessions that will follow this hearing into the rest of this year. And so we will be fine-honing and fine-tuning all of those things. And so this is a chance to hear from the public and from our residents and advocates and counselors as to what they would like to see and the questions that they would like to raise and work on during those sessions. I'll now turn it over to my co-sponsor, Councilor Mejia, for her opening remarks, followed by councilors in order of arrival. Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for both chairing and sponsoring this hearing. Thank you to Yasmin from Councilor Arroyo's office for your tireless work with the advocates, and thank you to central staff for ensuring that we are set up for success for this hearing. Earlier today, our office chaired a hearing regarding the speculations of receivership for BPS. We had administrative officials, advocates, and educational professionals each come forth to put in clear terms why receivership was a wrong move for BPS. Perhaps one of the biggest points brought up is how receivership puts barriers to democracy in place between the people closest to the pain and the people closest to the power. There was near unanimous agreement that we need to be doing more to increase family engagement, community interaction, and government accountability. The fact that we're having these conversations back to back is no coincidence. We cannot talk about the barriers to democracy without talking about the need for an elected school committee. As elected officials, we received a mandate from the people of Boston that an elected school committee needs to happen in our city. There will be times in the future to discuss specifically how that would work, but this hearing is meant for us to focus on the why. What we're talking about in this hearing is democracy. How can we utilize an elected school committee to help further the voices of the people in all spaces? This is the second time that we've held a hearing on this docket, so I hope that for our newcomers, it is extremely helpful in introducing you to the extensive work that the advocates have put forth to get us here and the work that needs to be done moving forward. And for those of you who are joining us for a second time, I hope that we can use this opportunity to figure out what we need to do as a body to follow the will of the people. We have an extensive group of panelists lined up here today. And although we have panelists with academic backgrounds or advocacy backgrounds or lived experience, in the spirit of democracy, everyone in our panel is an expert. Everyone's voice here matters, and we have an obligation to hear them and to follow through on that mandate that the people of Boston have asked us to deliver on. So thank you so very much to the Yes on 3 Coalition and all of the folks who got us this far. This conversation, as a BPS graduate, as a BPS parent, and as the chair of education, I believe this is the conversation of our time to ensure that we restore trust and democracy back to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. I'm now going to go in order of arrival, starting with Councillor Liz Braden. I also want to note we've been joined by Councillor Flaherty. So Councillor Braden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Mejia, for this initiative. I'm really here this afternoon. I know we had a hearing on this in our last term, and we're revisiting it again. I was almost expecting a working session this afternoon, but I'm happy to listen to what the advocates have to say and hear the different points of view on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. The working session's next. This is the final step before we get to that. Councillor Rusi Louis-Jen, followed by Council President Ed Flynn, who will then be followed by Councillor Murphy, who will then be followed by Councillor Flaherty. So with that, Councillor Louis-Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this hearing, and to the sponsors for putting the issue of elected school committee back front and center, and of course to the advocates for really pushing on this issue. There was a mandate we received from the city of Boston that residents loud and clear want an elected school committee. It is important that we are bringing people into democracy and that we have more accountability, and an elected school committee gets us there. Jean McGuire, the first at-large Black woman elected to Boston City Council, Boston School Committee. We have her legacy to look up to and to really build upon, so that we are drawing in more of our parents, more of our English language learner parents, so that we can have true representation in what our schools look like. Obviously, this would be a structural change, an important one, and there's a lot more work to do in improving our schools. I just want to have two flags that I've always flagged in the elected school committee discussion. Is one, expensive elections can be expensive. So it'd be interesting to see if we can couple any reforms with ideas of public campaign finance to help it ease the load on folks in running for office. And the second issue is, elections are subject to private capture. And we know here in Massachusetts and in Boston, we have a very strong private interest in public education that does not do good for any of our students. So just got to be careful about that as well. But just my hats off to the advocates on all the work here, fully supportive of having students on the school committee with voting power, because we need to make sure that we're listening to our young people in discussion. So happy to be here and happy to listen as a new city councilor, supportive of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Flynn, followed by Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just want to say thank you to the sponsors as well for this important discussion. Earlier today, we had a discussion about this possible state receivership of Boston public school system, and I stated receivership will disproportionately impact students of color. I came out against that. I know we have excellent teachers in our school, and now is not the time to turn our backs on students, teachers, and BPS families. Now getting to this issue, I was in support of an all-elected school committee. I still probably feel that way. I just want to ask the question of the timing as we head into the possible receivership. We have a new mayor that's only been here for several months. We're in the process of hiring a school superintendent. We have a struggling school system. Is now the time for this, or should we give the opportunity for Mayor Wu to have more time to continue, hopefully making progress with the Boston public school system? Just some questions to think about. The other question, or the other fact I wanted to highlight, during the most recent mayoral campaign, I believe 4 out of 5 of the candidates were basically for a hybrid option. I know that wasn't on the ballot. It was, are you in favor of an elected school committee or not? But 4 of the 5 candidates running for mayor supported a hybrid option. Just something to think about as well. We all want what's best for our students, for our children, for our BPS families, but we have some serious questions that we need to answer as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to weigh in.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Murphy, followed by Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you. Thank you to the chairs and for the sponsors of this bill. As an educator, I am happy that I've spent my day in meetings today centered around education. And I do know that, this passed overwhelmingly in the election. I really think it's a mandate that the residents, the city of Boston, are not happy with the Boston Public Schools and they want to see change. I do just want to echo what Councillor Flynn said. The option of a hybrid wasn't there. I do think the overwhelming passing of this was because that was a stamp saying what's going on now is not working and we really want a voice and have a say in how do we make this better. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and the working sessions ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Flaherty, whenever you're ready.
Councillor Arroyo, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming in clear. So at least I can hear you say,
Councillor Arroyo, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear us?
You're on mute, Flaherty.
And now he's gone. So when Councillor Flaherty is able to reconnect, we will go to Councillor Flaherty for comments. I want to turn it over to our first panel, which is comprised of parents and teachers, parents, teachers, and students. So our first panelist is Suleika Soto, parent at BPS. We also have Nima Avashia, who is a teacher at BPS, a teacher at the McCormick specifically, and Nesaj Ware, a student at the O'Brien. And we can start with Ms. Soto for public comment, for her comments, then Nima, and then Nesaj in that order, if they are ready.
If I'm ready. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, you are clear.
All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Mejia, for hosting this hearing today. My name is Suleika Soto. I have 2 girls who attend Boston Public Schools. My oldest is at Tech Boston Academy in Dorchester, and my youngest attends Blackstone Elementary in the South End, where we live. I'm proud to be a BPS graduate, and now as a parent, I am an active member in my school parent council, school site council, and citywide parent council. I am also very proud to be a parent organizer for the Boston Education Justice Alliance and co-founder of BPS Families for COVID Safety. So again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. So as I mentioned, I am one of the many active parents advocating every chance we get, many times for basic things, but always for a better Boston Public Schools. We as parents, students, educators, and community members need and have to have a voice in the policy decisions voted on by the Boston School Committee. We need to restore trust and accountability and outcomes. And like almost 100,000 Boston voters, I too believe the only way to do this is by returning to an elected school committee. One who serves in the best interest of and is accountable and responsive to parents, students, educators, and our school communities and city as a whole. My first experience with the Boston School Committee was shortly after I learned about some budget cuts that schools were facing in March of 2019. While picking my daughters up, I learned from another parent that due to the budget cuts, the Blackstone Elementary was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And with it, they were set to lose key teacher positions that supported students with disabilities specifically. We were also set to lose swimming, which to me as a parent, is like, I'm very lucky to have a school that has swimming, because we know that, many schools don't have that, and students of color have, don't have access to learning how to swim because of lack of access to pools and resources or what have you. So to top things off, I also learned at that time that the Blackstone, there were certain classrooms that had no walls and doors, which was not only unsafe because of all the school shootings that were happening and we were hearing around the country, but it was also very disruptive to students learning, especially my daughter, who has ADHD. So we were desperate for a solution at that time, for someone to hear us out. We marched with hundreds of other parents, students, educators, and community members, and we sat in the school committee chambers. At that time, I was in person, and we were doing that in protest and to plead not only for our budgets not to get cut, but for the safety of our children to be taken into consideration. So at that time, we held the mock meeting called the People's School Committee, where we passed the mock budget. It was a budget that gave a quality guarantee to students, which, I think the superintendent and the school committee are now, they have this quality guarantee that they're working on, but a lot of those ideas were brought on by parents who, want to advocate for simple things like clean bathrooms, working sinks, supportive staff, right? More resources rather than have to deal with budget cuts. So for many weeks, we went to school committee, we testified, and we thought our voices were heard when we left. Right at the end, we were promised $5 million goes for swords and walls. And although we were gonna lose swimming, we were still satisfied. And we thought that our voices were heard. We came out of there feeling hopeful. But unfortunately, under the leadership of an appointed school committee, there is no one to hold accountable for the promises that were broken and continue to be. We are now on the third mayor, third school committee chair, and soon to be third superintendent, and the same folks in the budget office. But one thing that remains the same is the broken promises, the lack of accountability for keeping these promises, and school communities continue to be pitted against each other when some receive resources that for others is just a dream. So now we have to plan to advocate to a new superintendent, right? And to a new school committee. Or to a new mayor, to new everything. But again, the promises still remain broken. Now we have the threat of receivership, which would make it even worse. That would, we would lose more of a voice, which, now at least we could go to school committee, but, we're not always heard. We have no one to hold accountable for the promises. And until the last hearing, where I connected to an NBC reporter and it was published on the news, we hadn't heard anything until after the news was published. Like, why does it take a news story for the school committee and BPS to make changes? Why do parents have to protest in order to get basic resources? And I say that that's because there is no accountability. And thank you, Councillor Flynn, for bringing up the thing around timing, but I think now is the time. I think it's been years and years of parents dealing with the same, mayor after mayor, school committee after school committee. There's still no accountability. It's been years. And although we're hopeful, once again, the news story was out and they're now promising a school building, I can't help but feel guilty as a parent that it's in the weeds, because I know that the Horace Mann was also promised a school building, and now they don't know what's going to happen. So again, the sort of the cycle of broken promises keeps on happening. So I just wanted to say that we as parents, students, and educators and community members, again, need and have to have a voice. We need to hold folks accountable, and the way to do that is to return to an elected school committee, because if we haven't been satisfied. I'm not going to say with the mayor's work, right? I'm not going to say with the superintendent's work. The school committee votes to pass these policies that pit us against each other. And once that's done, there's nothing that we can do. So again, I think now is the time to go back to an elected school committee. Has been a long time coming.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. I just see that Councillor Flaherty has just rejoined us. He's having some technical difficulties. I'm going to kick it over to you, Michael, if Councillor Flaherty, if your audio is working. I see you're with us. Going once, going twice, Michael. Councillor Flaherty, I don't know if your connection's working. Okay, I'm gonna go to our teacher who's with us, Neymar Avashia. If you are prepared to go with an opening up, hold on.
Can you hear me, Ricardo?
Yep, there you go. That works.
Who's actually managing it today that I keep getting bounced off and then they're not letting me back on?
Actually, I'm not sure. So I can ask, but you're coming in now, and we've also been joined by Councillor Laurel.
Very
So,
good.
Councillor Flaherty, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience, Mr. Chair. Thank you for putting this together and for the lead sponsors' efforts. We know what the issues are. We've got a third of our students have been habitually absent. We've got chronically underperforming schools. We've got student athletes not able to compete due to errors with the city's athletic director's department. We've got fluctuating graduation rates. Not enough of our kids are getting into some of the best colleges and universities in the world that call Boston their home. And as of late, we've got a superintendent's office that's become a revolving door. So we know what the issues are. I'm hoping that we're going to start to do some things different. And we're going to start to focus on teaching and learning and academic excellence and having a curriculum that speaks to Boston's economy so we can close these gaps, the achievement gap, the wealth gap, the opportunity gap, the health gap. So I'm excited, obviously, and look forward to an elected school committee, longtime public supporter and advocate for a elected school committee. And I guess the questions I would like answered, and maybe we need to do the homework on that, is identifying what school districts similar to the Boston public school size, which ones have an elected school system, and which ones have hybrid, which ones have appointed, but see how they work. But put the focus on ones that are high performing, that are achieving results. Our kids and their families deserve no less. We're so boastful of having the best colleges and universities in the world, but we're not as boastful when it comes to our Boston public schools. We need to turn that. We need to turn that around, and we need to make sure we're putting our best foot forward, providing the best quality education we can for all of our kids, all as in all, including English language learners and our special needs students. But at the end of the day, we cannot continue to pay what we're paying per pupil as enrollment continues to steadily decline, and we're not putting a good product out there. So I know that we have a lot of people that care. I know that we have a lot of dedicated professional teachers and faculty and other staff that are doing the best they can, but we cannot continue just to continue to throw money somewhere when there's no accountability. So my hope is that an elected school committee will be the start of accountability, and we can start to turn around these habitual and chronic issues that continue to dog our school system. So with that, look forward to the testimony and really want to get to how this will work. How do we envision an elected school committee working in Boston? What other models out there can we draw from? And they need to be successful models. They need to be models that we want to emulate here so we can get down a path of academic excellence and achievement. And again, it's about closing these gaps. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Now back to our panelists. We can go back to Neymar Avashia.
Thanks, councilors, for having me. My name is Neymar Avashia. I'm a resident of the neighborhood of Jamaica Plain, and I've been a teacher in the Boston Public Schools for 19 years, first at the McCormick Middle School and now at the merged BCLA McCormick Lower School. As you might know, the McCormick has found itself in the crosshairs of school committee decision-making several times over the past 3 years. In 2018, school committee was asked to vote to close our school and hand over the renovated building to another high school, in spite of our having been engaged in a 7 to 12 expansion planning process for multiple years. And then in 2019 and 2020, they were asked to first subdivide and then give away our students' only green space access to a local nonprofit seeking to construct a field house. They agreed to do this despite vocal opposition from the school community and the residents of Harbor Point, many of whom testified to the importance of preserving green space in a neighborhood that is extremely vulnerable to flooding for young people who otherwise might not have access to safe green space in which to play, at a school site where 7 to 12 expansion was imminent and playing fields would be a necessary component of a high school campus. In both cases, our community's experience as school committee was that we had no ability to access school committee members outside of 2-minute testimonies in meetings that ran late into the night. When we asked to meet with school committee members to discuss the proposal to close our school, we were told they were not allowed to meet with us alone. When we raised concerns about the rigged RFP process for the field house on Mount Vernon Street, a process from which our school committee was entirely excluded, the previous school committee chair simply kicked our concerns back to the same central office employees who had excluded our community in the first place. What's become patently clear through these experiences is that we, the students, families, and educators, are not the constituents of the Boston School Committee. Instead of seeking to understand our concerns and our needs through outreach, as an elected official might, we find ourselves begging to be heard, knowing all the while that our testimony is largely performative, as the decisions have already been made behind closed doors prior to actual votes. The school committee in its current composition enacts the will of the mayor and the central office. The needs of those most affected have little bearing on decision-making. I don't know that the outcome of school committee votes pertaining to the McCormick would be different with an elected school committee, but I do know that as citizens of the city of Boston, we would have recourse when our needs were ignored. And when the committee chose to violate its own stated policies around RFP processes and racial equity analyses, we'd be able to vote for different leadership. And our leaders would, I hope, feel a greater level of accountability towards us because their continued presence on the committee would be contingent upon our votes instead of upon enacting the will of the mayor. Until this year, I was a civics teacher. I taught my students about the importance of checks and balances in democracy. In its current state, there are virtually no checks and balances on the power of the Boston School Committee. If we want our citizenry to engage with our schools, to believe that their needs, their voices, and their advocacy matters, then we have to create a governance structure that is actually responsive to their advocacy. The current structure most definitely is not. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also want to introduce our next panel at this time. We're going to merge the two to make it easier for questions. We are joined by Senator Dianne Wilkerson from the NAACP Boston Branch Education Committee, Beth Huang, Director of the Massachusetts Voter Table, Susan Neymar, former Boston School Committee member, and Ruby Reyes, Director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance. I'm going to go to we're going to start with Senator Dianne Wilkerson, if she is ready.
I am ready, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Councillor Mejia, members of the council. Almost half of you are new. Many of the people on this in listening land have heard our presentation before. I come today, as the chairman said, on behalf of the Boston Branch NAACP and specifically the Education Committee. The branch, which has a long and intimate history with literally every milestone of education advancement and fallback in the city of Boston, including the 1991 loss of the elected school committee process. To understand where we are is really to understand how we got here. And I'm not going to start in the 50s and the 60s, but to say this: Boston schools are segregated because Boston's neighborhoods are segregated. It is a choice that the adults made not to take the step necessary to move forward to segregate our neighborhoods. And so in the meantime, we keep moving the kids around and using the kids as a means to profess to be a goal, focused on a goal of equity. We haven't gotten there yet, but say the school committee is, among other things, historically, and not just for Massachusetts, I would say across the country, school committees, local school committees have been the springboard for women all over this country, and Boston was no exception, entering public office and political office. And so among the many things that we lost with the abolition of our elected school committee was the entry ground for many women in politics. It is significant to note that 75% of BPS students are Black and Latino. And the story of busing is not the whole story of our system, but I will tell you that it started in 1977, because that is the year after almost 2 decades of trying. The Black, Latino, and white community allies were finally able to deliver the first citywide school committee person of a seven-person all citywide counselor school committee at that time. And that was John D. O'Brien. So in 1977, John D. O'Brien became the first Black elected to this committee in 100 years. Since 1877. And 4 years later, it took us, by the way, in that same election, the city had a ballot question that allowed the residents to choose district, citywide counselor, and school committee construct, because the city councils as well, city councilors were elected just 7 counselors citywide. And so 1981, 4 years later, Jean McGuire became the second elected Black person to the city council citywide. But also of note, in that 2 years later, when the city actually, I'm sorry, I don't want to read this because it's too long and I'm trying to go quickly, but just say that 4 years later, Jean McGuire was elected to the school committee in 1981. And in that same year, the city of Boston voted to move to a 9-district city council and school committee, 9 district councils, 4 citywide, for both the city council and the school committee. And so 2 years later, it only took 2 years later, in fact, in addition to John D. O'Brien and Jean McGuire, 3 Blacks and 1 Afro-Latina was elected to the Boston School Committee. And so here we are, finally, in the mid-'80s, with a school committee that was exceptionally more diverse and integrated than the Boston City Council. A feat, by the way, it's important to note that it took the Boston City Council 30 years to reach in terms of its diversity, where we hit in 1989 in our council. And that council, that diverse council, went to work earnestly trying to bring long neglected resources to the BPS schools that serve mostly Black and Latino student population. It was in 1989 that Mayor Raymond Flynn moved a non-binding question, just like the one we had in November 2021. But in 1989, that non-binding question was a ballot to move to an appointed school committee. So, of course, you know the history. We finally get there. We finally arrive. We finally have numbers, and they changed the rules again, and they did. The business community was very public in their support to abolish the school committee, and in fact, put $1 million on the table, hired a campaign manager to really go into the Black and Latino community to gain support to abolish the school committee. And what the council should know is it did not work. The Black and Latino community in that time overwhelmingly rejected the abolition of the school committee. And it really only passed the city by a 1.5% margin. So when we talk of a 79% margin of victory and a vote, a non-binding vote in the November of 2021 that passed in every single precinct, in every single ward in the city, you have to really kind of take a breath to think about what that means, because we've never had a question. Council, I know you said last week, I don't know if that's true. It is true. We've never had, you said you thought it probably was, you're right. We've never had a question on our ballot that was supported by every single ward and every single precinct across this city. And so it ought to make you stop and think about how fast we can get the will of the people done. Some of us believe the same thing is happening now in terms of the business community whispering. And because that's the only thing that we could think of that would justify the mayor's hands-off attitude and unwillingness to talk to the people who were involved in putting organizing the ballot question and delivering this overwhelming overwhelming mandate. We called the 65,000 votes that the mayor received a mandate, and I think that it was. But if you believe that 65,000 votes were a mandate, then what say you about 99,000 votes? Because that's what this question got. So if I just want to say thank you to you again. I'm going to end there. I could go on forever, but I won't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. And to the new councillors, we need to get this done. There are so many important issues. You heard one this morning around receivership. We're supposed to have a superintendent walking in the door in 7 weeks. Given where we know the search process to be, not sure how that's going to happen, at least not if it's to happen through a democratic and public process. There's no way we're going to make that deadline. But you are our eyes. You are our protector, our monitors. Please get this home rule petition drafted and done and to the mayor, and let us go to work and get this to the state legislature so we can get on with the business of democracy in our educational system in Boston. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I want to go to Ruby Reyes.
Thank you. My name is Ruby Reyes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance. Thank you to Councillors Arroyo and Mejia and to your offices for putting this hearing together. In my role at Beja, I have sat through 4.5 years of school committee meetings. I've given testimony at about 80 to 90% of those. I join many families and school communities every 2 weeks, worried about the desperate need of our schools and wondering if our school committee will even mention them. With an appointed committee, the only official lever of advocacy that currently exists is the 2 minutes allowed for public testimony at school committee meetings. School committee members are not supposed to respond, and many times what families ask for does not make it to the agenda or even get acknowledged. School communities pour their hearts out in testimony. Parents join in to watch in the midst of making family dinner. Parents who don't speak English courageously share their experiences through an interpreter. School communities desperate for answers are met with a 2-minute time clock and a sharp reminder that as we share our crisis, our 2 minutes are up. This is why the appointed committee doesn't work. Policy after policy being passed and decisions are being made that hurt our students, families, and school communities. There's no accountability in the structure because the mayor selects people to make decisions that are not accountable to our families. Central office leadership give mediocre and equitable presentations and share decisions that have already been made and get praised for it by our appointed school committee members. We have an equity tool that involves pulling together a few people as an afterthought to check off stakeholder input. Meanwhile, schools are being closed. We have a chief academic officer, the fourth in the past 4.5 years. Families are being denied special education and English learner services, and Superintendent Dr. Caselius and central office staff talk about, quote unquote, holding themselves accountable. Under normal circumstances, the role of an elected school committee member should be to hold central office accountable based on parent and student continuances. School communities have to bear the brunt of bad decisions being made by a superintendent in central office who, quote unquote, hold themselves accountable. School communities have had to bear the brunt of former school committee chair Michael Lecanto making fun of parents' names. School communities have had to bear the brunt of Nate Cooter, chief financial officer, explaining that the district was going to be transparent and communicate to school communities about Build BPS. Less than 2 weeks later, Cooter publicly refused to transparently share plans about the future of the Horace Mann School for the Deaf and continues to do so. Shaw students had to have a rally in front of their school to get a 4th grade, even though they've been promised much more over the past 10 years. Our school communities have had to bear the brunt of a broken appointed school committee structure. Some of the pushback for an elected school committee structure has been the concern of special interest groups pushing their agendas. This currently happens in our mayoral appointed school committee. The decision to give away the McCormick Schools green space to the Boys and Girls Club was a clear political favor. The McCormick and surrounding communities came out in droves and spoke in favor of keeping their green space. As COVID put an increased importance on the need for green space, The decision was passed by our appointed school committee anyways, and has not been reversed by our new mayor. In May 2019, I had the joy of watching my favorite school committee meeting when Blackstone parents made up of Black and Latino mothers took over school committee and created a parent-based People's School Committee. In both English and Spanish, they shared a list of demands of what each school should have as a bare minimum. This is what our school committee should be, but sadly our currently appointed structure will never get us there because it is based on self-accountability rather than accountability to BPS school constituencies. A mayor holds herself accountable by appointing certain members, and the appointed members then respond to central office leadership, who then hold themselves accountable to themselves. Where is the place for parents, students, and educators and residents to hold decision makers accountable in that system? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes. And now if we can go to Ms. Susan Neymar.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Susan Neymar. I'm a resident of Jamaica Plain. Thank you, Councillors Arroyo and Mejia, for putting this together, the hearing together. So I served on the appointed school committee from 1997 until 2005, and I'm here to share my support for returning to an elected school committee. When Boston went to an appointed school committee in 1991, I was a parent of 3 children who attended Boston Public Schools. I was active in their schools and in the citywide parent organizing. And Suleika's story sounds a lot like the same thing. It sounds so familiar 30 years later, you know, the same stuff that we're fighting against and not feeling heard. I applied to serve on the appointed school committee because there wasn't any parent voice represented at the time. And so I'm speaking to you today from having been on the inside for 8 years and staying involved since then. It doesn't sound like most of you need any convincing about going back to the elected committee. But you know, the reason I wanted to just talk about the reasons why I support this return to an elected body. And the through line is really about trust. And how do we build trust in our school system? And several of you have spoken to that. When I served on the appointed school committee, I was constantly frustrated that we were not doing the things that we know work to engage people, to engage families, and specifically to get input from those who've been disenfranchised, low-income families, Black and other people of color, English language learners. So I took the lead to organize community forums on behalf of the school committee. And I had several of my fellow committee members and senior school staff department staff voice concerns like, why would we want to set ourselves up to be yelled at for 3 hours? But we held these forums, community forums, over a couple of years to gain input on policy decisions in front of us. And we did the things that we know engage people. You know, we did personal outreach to parent groups and grassroots groups and youth groups and neighborhood groups. And we had childcare and translation. And then we set up the forum so that everybody had a chance to talk to each other and listen to each other. Hundreds of people showed up, and we got a lot of really valuable input on some of the policy issues we were dealing with at the time. And we also got a lot of appreciation and thank yous, and often from the folks who had been the ones yelling at us. But this level of input was not the norm, and it still isn't for the appointed school committee. And as others have said, you know, structurally, there is just not the pressure to be accountable to the families served by our schools. These forums took a lot of effort, and they were like a drop in the bucket in terms of the goodwill and trust that was lacking, and obviously still is. And I think we underestimate how much that lack of trust undermines partnership with families and communities. And that's a missing piece. It's not just the pedagogy and the product, but it's the process. And how do we make sure that people feel heard? I'm going to just take a quick minute to add to Dianne's history, because I think this is relevant to how you build trust and where the lack of trust comes from. And it informs how our institutions and our communities still function and think. So I did some research when I was on the school committee of, how long it had been that the Black community had been petitioning for the school committee for access to equitable schools. And the first time that they did that was 1798. And again in 1800, and several times in the 1840s. And every one of their petitions was rejected. So the Black community of this city was organized and they weren't listened to. And it took a federal court order after more than 175 years of effort to make any kind of change. And so I bring that up because this history gets lodged into our culture, into the culture of the schools, as well as into the thinking and beliefs of communities that have had that history. And it's been undermining that trust for generations. Trust is a hard thing to measure, so it often gets overlooked. But think about when you don't trust an institution, what happens? Do you go back to a store or a service that didn't deliver on what it said, or where you felt disrespected or not listened to? No, right? So how do we build trust? A number of you spoke to the people spoke last November, and that's one way is we need to listen to that mandate that the vote delivered to us. And, I think when we look at the persisting racial achievement gap, the fixes have as much to do with that voice and trust and democracy as they do with pedagogy. If there's one thing I learned sitting on the school committee is that when people did feel heard, they were more likely to accept decisions that they may not have agreed to than when they didn't even have any real voice in making those decisions. It's not rocket science. So I just want to end by appreciating the specifics of returning to the elected school committee are not yet spelled out, and that you're going through a process to include those most impacted in figuring out sort of what's the sequence and what might it look like, because that models the inclusion that we need in the Boston Public School decision-making at the policy level. And I'm just going to end with a quote. I think it's from Peter Senge, who said, change moves at the speed of trust. So we've all talked about we need change. Everybody knows the schools need change, but without that trust, it's not going to happen. And, I just would say that returning to the elected, I don't think by itself is going to fix all the problems, but it's an important piece of the equation. So thank you for your time, and good luck with moving this process because it needs to move. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neymar. And I'm going to go to Nesaj before we head to our panelists. I think she's in the attendees. If we can
she wasn't she logged in and with her phone and then logged in with her computer, so she needs to be promoted to panelist now.
There she is. So Nesaj, where, and then we'll go to the counselors in order, and then we'll go to community comment.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My apologies for being late. However, it's bad. Sorry. So I'll keep it short, but today I'm glad that I'm here to speak with you all about why an elected school committee is so important. For me personally, I was actually but I was able to join the superintendent search committee and hear all the students speak. And honestly, it was just very disheartening to hear how many third graders and fourth graders and fifth graders were on the call advocating that they wanted a superintendent that cared about them and a superintendent that looked like them. And hearing all these concerns on the behalf of third graders was honestly just, like I said, very disheartening, because I feel like our third graders should be spending their time having fun and doing better things, not advocating and telling adults how adults should be acting, what adults should be doing in their jobs. And I say all this to say that having an elected school committee will ensure that all of the wishes and desires and aspirations that these third, fourth, and fifth graders had for their superintendent, the same can go for their school committee, because as we know, the school committee and the superintendent work hand in hand to make sure that the district is representative of all students and amplifying and hearing the voices of students. So thank you so much, and I'll stay on if I'm needed.
Thank you, Nesaj. And so with that, I'm going to go to the counselors in order of arrival, but starting with my original co-sponsor, Councillor Mejia, followed by Councillor Braden, followed by Councillor Louis Jen, and then we'll go down the list. So Councillor Mejia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you to all the panelists that have spoken already. And I'll just start off with Naysaj. Naysaj is a BPS student. She's going to be going off to Howard University, so woo-woo. Congratulations. And Naysaj is also a very active young person in our Boston Public Schools, and I think that her testimony really goes to amplify the importance of having youth voice, not only just a check box that we have youth, but that young people are also able to vote on matters that are impacting young people. So I'm curious, Naysaj, what would you say your vision would be for the role of young people on the elected school committee? What would it look like? What's your vision?
Definitely, I envision having, if not one, two student representatives that are elected as well on the school committee. Reason being that, again, like you said, Councillor, student voice is very important. And I just feel like students are the people that are directly impacted by all the policies that are made by the superintendent and school committee. So it's only right that they have a voice and seat at the table. Also being that they're in these schools and they're directly working with their peers. So they know what's best for the students, essentially.
Thank you for that, Naysaj.
Also, sorry, Councillor, if you don't mind me adding, sorry, my apologies. Just having at least someone of every nationality and ethnicity, I just feel like that's very important, again, so that the school committee is representative of all the students in BPS.
Thank you for that, Naysaj. I just have a few questions, and I'm going to kick it over to my colleagues, Councilor Arroyo, just because I know we have a lot of folks who are signed up for testimony as well. So I think that it's really important for us to really underscore the importance of family voice. And I love Susan's comments in regards to the best way to, in regards to the whole trust factor. I see this as a bad relationship, you know, when someone does some, you know, when you're involved in a relationship and things fall apart, it's hard for you to really rebuild that trust. And I think that if we don't rip the Band-Aid off and at this moment and say, now is the time for us to, because there's so much transition happening, now is the time for us to have an elected school committee so that we can ensure that folks who are elected are able to make sound decisions that are not going to be based on political, I don't want to say favors, but just political accountability. I just feel like we need people who are going to make those tough decisions. And I think now is what this moment calls for. But I'm just curious for those folks, and, you know, and Senator Wilkerson, you know, this whole idea, and what I have to say is what I see is that as soon as Black and brown people started really gaining political power, if you will, that's when they decided to pump the brakes. And, you know, I'm not going to say that that was what led to it, but it just feels to me another way of oppressing the will of the people and the voices of communities that are mostly impacted by the decisions that are being made in our public education system. So I just thought that that was also very interesting in terms of just the timing. But we just had our hearing on receivership, which many of you attended, so thank you so much. And I just wanted to reserve some space to hear from any of the members of our panel to talk about how you see the topic of an elected school committee and receivership intersecting. And what would you say to some people who are anti-receivership, but also anti an elected school committee? And I'll go to Ruby.
Sure. I guess I would just say that, you know, our parents have fought so hard to make space and be part of decision-making where there is limited space in the current structure. So it's not like our families, DPS families aren't active and they don't care about their schools and they don't care about their school communities. Students care, educators care. I think to want receivership and to want an appointed school committee is not to want families as part of the decision makers. And that unfortunately is just very short-sighted. A lot of the solutions that are actually solving problems right now were generated from families, from parents. The quality guarantee was a list of demands made by families at the Blackstone. a lot of the sixth grade expansion, holding the school committee accountable for adhering to their own decision to have a K-6, 7-12 model for all schools. That is largely being pushed by families. The school committee themselves and BPS leadership are not the ones really upholding to their own policies. So I do think it is very short-sighted to want to exclude those who have the solutions, who have the passion, and who are completely committed to making the Boston Public Schools better. The state is not going to do that for us, and our current appointed body is not doing that for us, and it doesn't work.
Thank you, Ruby. And not sure if anybody else who testified earlier today wanted to say something. Suleika.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to say the same thing. Like, for you to not want receivership and then, like, receivership and an appointed school committee, to me, are all in the same. There's something that you said earlier in earlier's hearing, which is we need more democracy, not bureaucracy. And that's something that really like resonated, right? If we go into receivership, that's going to be a bureaucracy, and that's what we currently have. Like Ruby mentioned, like everyone has says, there's no one to hold accountable right now. The school committee is supposed to hold the superintendent accountable, just like, we want more accountability. We don't want less of it. So I just think it would be hypocritical to be, if you support one thing and not the other, like it doesn't make sense. They both go hand in hand. They're both one is about retaining voices of families, and it's more about giving more voices to families, right? Like, we don't need the opposite. I think moving towards receivership would do the opposite of that, would undermine the voices of families and of the city of Boston. I think that we know what our school needs, and that's why we show up at school committee, and that's why we try to do whatever we can to hold them accountable, like Ruby says. So there needs to be more local control, more family voices. There doesn't need to be more like top down sort of decision making. We need the opposite of that.
Yeah, and I know that, thank you for that, Suleika. I know that, Susan, you have your hand up, and then I'm going to make one last comment and kick it back over to Ricardo before he puts me on mute.
Thank you.
Yeah, just very quickly that, what Ruby and Suleika talked about, yes, and it needs to be structural. There needs to be a systemic and structural way to ensure family voice. And, the state can say whatever they want, but there's no structural guarantee with that going that direction.
Yeah. And so, Ruby, I'm always all about, you have your hand up, so I'll just, I
also, just along the lines, I think a lot of folks are really exhausted. It feels like part of the trust component, right, is that decisions get made without families, and then families are fighting to either maintain or push back these like false promises. And so that is exhausting for BPS families. It's exhausting, and that's what feeds them mistrust, right? And that is part of why structurally it's unhealthy, because our families are exhausted. And then with the pandemic, it doesn't help. That exhaustion is further exacerbated.
Yeah. And I'll just say, and I'll kick it back over to Councillor Arroyo. And I do appreciate the extra time that you've given me, Councillor Arroyo. The other thing that I would just like to say is that I remember as a parent being in the school committee meeting where the Blackstone literally took over. And I remember being at school committee meetings until 11 o'clock at night. And I felt like it was so abusive that the voices of the people who were most impacted had to wait the longest to be heard. And I think that speaks volumes, right? To even just the structural changes that we need to make in terms of who has the right to speak. And I think that once you have someone who's elected, then you feel like that you're being represented, and so are the issues and the things that you deeply care about, because you put that person in office, you can also take them out. And that's actually more empowering to families. And I think that will also help rebuild that trust. So I'm going to yield the rest of whatever time I don't have to give back to my council colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you, everybody, for that. Councilor Braden, followed by Councilor Louis-Jen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, in terms of, I found the history lesson by Senator Wilkerson very, very helpful, because I know that it's a relatively recent thing that we've had district city councillors, and that changed the game completely for our districts when we had someone from the district who understood the issues and was able to speak to those issues in City Hall and the council. So have we discussed the structure of this proposed elected school committee? Are we thinking that we'd have 9 district seats? We also have the student representative. What thoughts? Any consideration been given to that question so far?
Yes, and so just to be clear, obviously all of this is still moldable in working sessions, but currently the way that it's written, we have exactly 9 district seats available, similar lines, and we can figure all that out in the working sessions as to whether or not it looks the same or how we craft that or what that looks like. But yes, there's at-large seats, student seats, and district seats in the model currently.
That's good, thank you. And so I think that was really my main question. It's been very edifying, very instructional this evening to really listen to all the different presentations. And the rollout then, in terms of my Councillor Flynn, President Flynn's concern about the timing, the rollout, when do we expect that the whole thing would be completely rolled out?
Depends on the process. So the phasing in of the template itself is modeled off of Chicago, which went from an appointed school committee to a elected school committee within the last 2 years. And the format in which they used was a phased-in approach in order to allow the folks that are currently appointed to end their terms and have sort of a natural process of replacing them. I also think the phased-in approach gives folks an opportunity to run actual campaigns and to put together sort of the community information. We haven't voted for school committee members in quite some time, and so you have to do community education on the fact that this is now an elected seat and that it will be on the municipal ballots and those kinds of things. But the phased-in approach currently starts with as currently written, which obviously can change depending on when this gets signed and when this ultimately gets to the House and all of those things. But it currently starts with 2022 student seat being officialized as a voting seat. And then, so with this coming school year, and then the second phase would be January 8th, 2024, which would add 3 at-large school committee members who would be elected in the 2023 municipal election. So it would not be a special election. It would be on the same ballot as all the city council races. Obviously, it's a mayoral off year. And then in 2026, you would see which would be the 2025 election, you would see the rest of them transition in to a fully elected school committee. And so you're talking about having a fully elected school committee under the model on this ordinance by 2026. So that would give us sort of 4 years lead-in time to a fully elected model. But that's how it's written now. It doesn't have to stay that way. Obviously, that can move in a bunch of different ways, but that is what's currently on paper.
The one concern I have, and maybe I'm being paranoid a little, but is the outsized influence of outside money and becoming involved in this school committee elections. And I would like to, echo Councillor Louis-Jean's suggestion that we should be maybe perhaps looking at public funding for school committee elections and barring, barring big contributions, because we know how the ballot measure on bilingual education went way back when. So that's just a concern I have that I'd like to flag. And I have no other questions at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. And that is a concern I think that many of us share regarding, regarding fundraising and what this would look like for the school committee in the future. But thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Louis-Jean, the floor is yours if you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone who spoke. I just have one thing that I'd like, I think Nesaj to speak to a little bit, and that's about student voting power on the school committee, and ideally what you think would be best in terms of the number of students on the elected school committee, and why you think that would be the right answer. Of course, I have my opinions, but would love to hear what you think as a young BPS student about what student representation on the school committee should look like.
Councillor Louis-Jean, just wanted to let you know that Nesaj had to jump off, so she's no longer with us.
Oh, okay. I thought she was here. Okay. Well, I believe she had said, she supports having multiple students. And I just want to throw out there that I think it's really important to have 2 students on the school committee, just because it can also be, as a young person, it can be a very daunting process when you have a bunch of, adults around saying, talking, and it could be very intimidating for that young person to feel like they have their voice heard, or that you have a partner on among the adults. So just advocating for multiple student voices on the school committee with voting power, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Louis-Jean. Anything else, Councillor Louis-Jean? I see you muted yourself, so it looks like that's enough.
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you. So Council President Ed Flynn, followed by Councillor Erin Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had a couple issues, not issues or concerns. One of them is, and this isn't a reason for it or against it, just something to consider. I know some of my colleagues mentioned it. If we have an elected school committee, which I support, but if we have an elected school committee, is there a possibility, can we look across the country and see if this has happened? Are there organizations in support of charter schools? Are there organizations in support of voucher programs that weigh heavily financially in support of one particular candidate and against another candidate? Do they have an unfair advantage during this process if they're able to raise $200,000-300,000 for a candidate that's in favor of charter schools or vouchers? So, Mr. Chair, that's my first question. Maybe that's to you, Mr. Chair, I guess.
So we certainly know that school privatization money and charter money plays a role in every election. I mean, in our last mayoral election, we certainly saw a lot of money come from those camps through independent expenditure, super PACs, things of that nature. And so I can tell you that I know that they've played a role in funding in other races. I think Denver is an example of one of those places where they've put a lot of money. But ultimately, because of the elected the aspect of it, more money is usually an advantage, but it does not guarantee a victory, obviously, or guarantee an outcome. And so I wouldn't have off the top of my head what the success rate of those candidates has been. But I do know that obviously that money finds its way into every election tangentially related to education. And that would include obviously our school committee races, unless there's some way for us to create laws regarding special expenditures or independent expenditures in those school committee races specifically. And I haven't really teased out all of that, so I don't have that answer off the top of my head. That would be for working sessions to figure out what we could or could not do.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's an important part of this discussion. Is I wouldn't want to see some business group come in here with $300,000 and put it on a candidate and that candidate win, and then that person in the school committee is owned by the charter school of voucher programs. That's one of my concerns.
Councillor, I have something to say in regards to that, if you don't mind, before
if I could just go to you after Councillor Flynn's done.
I'm just going to respond to a question that he asked.
Oh, you mean as a co-sponsor?
Yes, as a co-sponsor.
Yes.
So for those folks who followed my journey, I only won by 1 vote, right? And most of and out of the top 5 candidates that were running in that same race outspended me in many ways. And so there's something to be said about running a race and winning without dollars. And I think that it's very important for us to keep that in mind as we continue to have this conversation, that those votes really do matter. And I think as part of this conversation, Councillor Flynn, that I think it is definitely something that we should consider in terms of putting some guardrails, safeguards around spending in this area. I think as we continue to talk about what it could look like so that we can get ahead of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Mejia. And I guess my final question, Councilor Arroyo, Chair Arroyo, is just a comment or a question if you want to respond to it. But as we continue the process of seeking a school superintendent, just thinking out loud, what impact would this have on potential candidates that want to be superintendent, knowing that there's likely a change in the school committee structure? Have we reached out at all? I guess my question is, have we reached out at all to the search committee? It's a group out of Texas, but have we reached out to the search committee, letting them know that it's likely that we're heading towards an elected school committee and that the incoming superintendent will likely be working with an elected school committee?
So I have not. I can't speak for other counselors or whether or not the administration has made that central to any conversation with the search committee. I'm sure it's something that the incoming superintendent will have to consider upon a decision to ultimately take this job or not. But what I would say is one of the things that has most pushed me in the direction of supporting an elected school committee is that currently, as written, the appointed school committee is supposed to hire and fire and make those calls on our school superintendents, and particularly under the last administration where we had Superintendent Tommy Chang fired, and it didn't seem like the school committee even knew that was happening. And then you had a replacement in place in the interim with Laura Parril, and they didn't seem to know that was happening at the time. And then finally we made a hire. It feels like that process is often the superintendent serves at the pleasure of the mayor more than at the pleasure of the school committee, which is who is supposed to be grading and holding them accountable to their job, and hiring and firing them. So I'm not sure how much, obviously it's a big change to go from that to an elected school committee. I know with the elected city council, for instance, we don't cede our powers very easily. So I think they would likely have to take into consideration a different sort of structure where ultimately they're going to be more responsible, I think, than they currently are to that school committee and to the people who elect them than to, say, the mayor in the structure that we currently have. But of course, that's always a balance. And I do think that they will have to take that into consideration. I think that's a fair question about how it impacts the next superintendent, because the reality is this next superintendent is going to be hired by this school committee as it's currently composed. And this will not beat that process. This will not take effect until after that person's already hired. So I think that's a fair conversation. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Arroyo. And Councilor Flynn, as you know, the city of Boston, we're the only municipality in the entire state that does not have an elected school committee. And for those folks who will be applying for the position for superintendent, if this is a national search, I'm going to assume that many of those folks are walking into this understanding that at some point, once we do transition into an elected school committee, because I'm going to speak it into existence, that this should be an expectation that they walk into understanding that there is a slight possibility that this will be the case. So I think that, it's a fair concern, but I do believe that folks who are going to be applying should come in with that expectation.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Mejia. I agree with you. My request, Mr. Chair, is maybe the city council send a letter to the search committee and at least go on record that there's this strong possibility of an elected school committee, and that should be factored in on the upcoming application process, just so that just so that potential candidates are aware of it. They may have worked with elected school committees in the past in their respective districts. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to send a formal letter to the search committee. That's my recommendation. Anyway, thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for the important work that you're doing.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I think that's very doable. So I think that's something we can certainly get done. Councilor Murphy, followed by Councilor Flaherty. I'm not sure if Councilor Murphy has had to go, but I see Councilor Flaherty's here. I know earlier you were having some technical issues but there you are. So the floor is yours.
I think I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Just quick housekeeping matter. I think it's either yours or it could be Councilor Mejia's. Sounds like there might be a smoke detector or a carbon monoxide detector that might be beeping. So just want to make sure that whoever it is that take the necessary steps to get a battery in that so no one has any incident. So just a friendly reminder, because I can hear it. I don't know if it's yours or Julia's, but
it's Councilor Mejia. But it's
you guys safe.
Yeah, it's Councilor Mejia, and it's a good reminder. Thank you, Councilor.
Public safety announcement of the day. Obviously, it was a process to get an elected school committee. So obviously, want to make sure that we're able to maintain that, because as quickly as we saw one get elected, it can go the other way fairly quickly. And I know that it's important to note here, I want to make sure no one rests on their laurels here, that there was no organized opposition to the ballot question like there had been in years past. And also put in play that taxpayers have had it with chronically underperforming schools. Parents are concerned about school safety. They're frustrated with the school assignment process. Folks are outraged about ballooning transportation costs, where we're spending more money on fuel, maintenance and repair, and brake pads and windshield wipers than we are with respect to before and after school and wraparound programs, money that could be better spent in the classroom for smaller class size, et cetera. Parents are concerned not enough AP courses, options, and college prep work. And then, of course, our English language learners and our special needs students and their families and parents who are frustrated. So all of that, it was very combustible, and again, with no opposition. So I just want to make sure I've heard several times, the language of talk about mandate. Well, it was almost like the perfect storm. I just want to make sure when we're creating this and we're setting it up that we're doing so, giving it obviously lasting power, but making sure that we're looking at other school districts that have elected school boards, and really to dovetail on Councilor Braden, just to kind of get a structure or get a sense as to what is this going to look like and how do we make it the best elected school committee in the country. That's where my focus is, and so I guess, to lack of a better term, sort of leave the politics out of it, and let's put teaching and learning, let's put the children and BPS families first, and have everybody be well-intentioned to make sure that we're moving the dial and closing these gaps. So through the chair, I guess, is any sense as to sort of, maybe this is more for a working session, but if we're going to be talking about the structure of what this is going to look like, there are only 36 participants on this call. I clearly think that we may need to have a broader conversation and get out into the communities with this to get a sense as to how they would like to see it function, given that they voted for it. So that's my 2 cents on it. We obviously want to make sure we put the best product on the field, if you will, and the focus on our kids and BPS families, you know, whether it's 9 district, whether it's an at-large component, whether we obviously need to have student capacity. So I guess from your perspective, I guess, what is this going to look like, and when can we start to get into the meat and potatoes of the structure and the functioning of the elected school committee?
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. So I know that Councilor Mejia and myself have had about, I think, 4 or 5 community meetings already in different languages with translators and interpreters over the last 3 months. I think we have another one still scheduled to go in Mandarin. And so that work is already happening. In terms of the working sessions, I believe we have the first one this month. I don't think this is going to be done in one working session, to be perfectly honest with you. So this will be multiple working sessions. The goal is to get this done this year, in the sense that we will have this on the desk for the mayor to do with what she will in this calendar year. The hope is that this can be a collaborative process within the council itself as we put this together, each person representing their constituents to put together the very best thing we can for parents and students. And I will just say that combustibility that you are speaking to, I think it's an accurate portrayal of where voters are with the lack of control of our schools from a voter's perspective, from a teacher's perspective, with the appointed school committee process. I think folks are done with it. I think there's a reason why no candidate that I'm aware of on the council side who made it past the primary was appointed school committee. I think on the mayoral side, most of the candidates were pro-elected. We've gotten, or some version of hybrid. I think we've got into a space where folks understand that community wants input in the decisions being made on their behalf, and that the most direct way to have input is through elections. And so the goal is to give them that through this. And so, to be very clear, the first working session to sort of start having real meat and potato conversations, as you put it, on structure and all of these, and sort of when and how we layer this in, and what are we looking at, and what seats and districts at large and student, and how's all that working together. That's this month. And then that will be followed by as many other working sessions as it takes till we all feel, or the majority of this council feels like we are in a position to send something to the mayor that we are all proud to have. I don't think anybody, I'll speak for myself. I certainly don't take lightly the fact that this has been an almost 20, 30-year fight for an elected school committee again. And so the goal here is to get this as right as we can, so that we're not rushing that process. And so that's why we're sort of doing this. That's why we're having 2 hearings, because we have 5 new councilors who weren't here for the last hearing. So rather than just jump right into working sessions, I wanted to give folks another shot to hear from folks and to really say what they're looking for and what they're trying to do. And so my hope is not to rush that process, Councilor Flaherty.
Very good. Thank you for that clarification, for your stewardship. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And I see Councilor Mejia does want to address that question as well as a co-sponsor. So Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Just wanted to underscore that the series of community conversations that we've been hosting alongside the Yes on 3 coalition have been in the dominant native language. So we have been super intentional about educating people about what is at stake and soliciting feedback from community so that they can inform our thinking as we continue to move forward. So that is definitely has been part of our process to ensure that community voice are the ones who are leading us in this charge. And I also think, to your point in terms of all of the issues that you named that is wrong with BPS, from chronically absent students to all of the other issues that you've named, as a BPS graduate and a BPS mom, I understand this from my own lived experience. And that is one of the reasons why we're at a point right now that an elected school committee is the way to go, to ensure that people are making decisions based on the needs of students and not on the needs of political interests. So absolutely agree. And I think that as we continue to move forward, I will make sure that I change my battery so the next time I don't blow up your ears. And thank you for that feedback.
Thank you for the response, and just want to make sure everyone stays safe.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Worrell, I believe, and then we can head to community comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panelists that gave testimony. My question is around the structure. Is there a reason why we're modeling, is it Chicago? Was there any like data points there or anything that we saw in Chicago to kind of take that model and bring it here for our elected school committee?
So the structure is pretty much not dictated by Chicago. If you're talking about the structure, if you're talking about the phase-in approach to elections, that's taken from how Chicago phased in their new elected school committee. I can go through a number of different reasons why I think it makes more sense to do that than have 13 races at once with 13 candidates at once when we're still trying to make sure that that structure is really explained to the community in a real way, and just sort of making sure that we have a consistent transition path to a fully elected than just sort of ripping that Band-Aid off right away. But I also certainly can hear from other folks, and I certainly have heard from other folks who want it immediately. I think that the most responsible thing we could do is phase it in, but I'm happy and open to other thoughts and folks on that.
Okay, and I guess my question is more so on, are there any other models across, the country, across the state, that are working that we can model after I'm bringing it here to Boston in terms of how many people sit on that elected school committee, or if there's anything else that they're doing different that we're not thinking of?
Yeah, so I would just say that every municipality in the state has a school committee that's elected. I don't know that we would copy all of their models in terms of who sits where and how many. I think we would probably want to look at, I think Councillor Flaherty has brought this up a number of times, sort of sizable school districts that look like ours. Chicago's was one that was appointed like ours that did the work to become elected again, like we are doing here. And that's recent. Other bodies have been elected certainly for a different amount of time, and we can look at all of those sort of models as examples and see what works best and what works there. But we are the anomaly. I just want to be clear that an appointed school committee is an anomaly. That's not the way that this works. I'm not aware of any hybrids. Happy to do some research on that. I'm sure there might be one somewhere in the country, but we are the sort of exception to the rule with our appointed structure. And we did a lot of work back in and I'm using we liberally here. I mean, we as the city of Boston did work in 1992 to go to that model. It required charter changes and all kinds of things, and now this is sort of reversing it back to that. So I'm sure there's examples and models that we would look at, that we can look at, of elected school committees. I don't know of any model of an appointed that has worked out though, and so that's why we're sort of where we are now. I see our panelists, Ruby Reyes, would like to chime in on either one of those two things.
I actually just wanted to chime in on something Councillor Flaherty said. I think in terms of the blanket statement of calling schools chronically underperforming, I really just want to encourage you to really think about MCAS being used as the final performance score for whether a school or district is chronically underperforming. I think some of our public speakers in the first panel talked a little bit about MCAS scores. I'm happy to send you additional information about that, but I'm just really concerned about kind of that blanket statement of our schools being chronically underperforming and not really looking at how the MCAS system as a whole creates those systems of chronically underperforming measures based on whether or not a student passes one exam, as opposed to looking at progress. I think that happened with the Endeavor as an example of a school who went into receivership by the state, in part because they had a lot of English learner students, and students were able to progress 2 and 3 grade levels, but that is not what the MCAS measures. So I'm happy to have another conversation with you offline, but I just really need to push back because I've heard you say that several times. I heard you say it this morning. And in the lieu of talking about safety and our students, that labeling is just really harmful.
So Councillor Flaherty, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Just for the record, Ruby, I'm on record of not supporting MCAS as the sole criteria for our school systems. You can check the record and the facts on that. The facts are, though, that we have a lot of schools that are underperforming and have repeatedly underperformed year after year after year. We, City of Boston, Boston City Council, continue to fund them. And the per pupil costs continue to increase. At the same time, enrollment decreases. So of the fleet of 121 schools, I'm happy to go through and we can cherry pick together the schools that chronically underperform. And I've had a front row seat as the longest serving member of the City Council, and I've participated in the budgets and have attended and have visited the schools. And it's primarily, it's usually the same list of schools that are MCAS aside. So it's school leadership, it's parental participation. We'll go through the list, parental participation. When you think about the schools that are performing well, and you look at those common denominators and you put them up against the schools that are not, and you see where parents are pulling their kids. For example, like the Condon School in South Boston, I want to say over the last several years, 400 people have pulled the enrollment has decreased by 400 students. That means that something's going on in that school. It's not functioning on all levels. Is that the school leadership? Is it, you go through the list of A to Z. So when I'm using the words chronically underperforming, I'm identifying schools during my time here as a member of the council, and the longest serving member, where the schools continue to lag behind their other fellow schools. So not saying it in a disparaging way, and just saying it in a factual way that we continue to spend increasing number on it, and we continue to see enrollment decrease. So I appreciate your point, but I just want you to know that never once have I felt or said that the MCAS should be the be all end all. It should be a factor, help us a barometer, but particularly from speaking to someone that didn't always test well and standardized test, I've never once thought that the MCAS should be the sole criteria for whether or not a child should move from one grade to the other, or they should be able to graduate. So I just want you to know that.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. I see Councillor Mejia wants to chime in on that.
Yes, thank you, Ruby, for uplifting that. I think it's important for us as we continue to have these conversations is to, I've been really encouraging folks to lead with assets, right? Our children are not vulnerable or marginalized, they're resilient, right? And I also think we have an opportunity, this is what I've been saying everywhere that I go, is that we're all responsible for the state of the education system right now. Every single one of us on the council, DESE. So I think that accountability has to be shared, and it can't just be about Boston Public Schools and Boston Public Schools failing. I think we also need to recognize that in many ways, we have all played a role in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So I think it's really important as we continue to talk through not just this hearing on all things that deal with anything here in the city of Boston, is that accountability is 360. And I think, as I might not be the longest serving councillor, I've only been on the council for 28 months. And in the last 28 months, I have seen the dysfunction. I have seen why we get stuck on replay and the situations, it's just another conversation about another conversation. But the political will and courage to really do right by our students sometimes falls short. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I'm such a big supporter of an elected school committee, because at some point, I think that that's what's going to change the conversation, is by having people who are elected and who will be held responsible and accountable to the people who put them in office.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. And then Councillor Orwell, I'm sorry that sort of took off right in the middle of your questions. I don't know if you have any other questions there.
Nope, I'm all set.
Thank you. I see Dianne Wilkerson has her hand raised. Senator, if you'd like to speak.
Mr. Chairman, this is to Councilor Flaherty's question he asked at the beginning of the hearing, and Jen referenced it again for the members. There is currently no successful hybrid school committee that is operating to anything near rave reviews. We have 3 that are actually in the process of reverting back to the elected school process. And in fact, Councillor, the chairman mentioned Chicago, the pointed system that is in the process of reverting. What you should note is that they're reverting from appointed because the state took them over and it didn't work. So they're going back to an elected school committee. State took them over in 2016. Prince George County system, the DMV Maryland is the other. They actually voted. The appointed and elected school committee voted in, I think it was January of this year, that declared this was a failure. They were suing each other. It's been nothing but chaos. They voted to go back to elected school committee, and they were so anxious about it. They already did their home rule petition, and it's already before the General Assembly in 3 months. And so just, but to the point about failing school districts or schools, I think what the lesson in the history for Boston and even Massachusetts has shown us is that, yeah, we've had some schools that have been historically, chronically underperforming. What I think we should conclude is that giving them to the state doesn't make it any better. There is something that we need to do. We have some examples in Boston that the state, because they were underperforming, they didn't get any better when the state designated them underperforming and took them over. I absolutely agree with you that we have some that are classified as chronic, and there are things we need to do for sure. But I think it may be something more likely to be effective if that thing is determined right here on the ground in the city about what we do with the schools that are in that category of underperforming.
Thank you, Senator Wilkerson. I just want to note that I think that question was actually raised most recently by Councilor Worrell, asking about examples of other versions and models. But Councilor Flaherty, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the senator. Yeah, I did raise it in my opening, and I also want you to know I'm on record of a fully elected school committee. Yeah, so I'm not going by route, but I know that it was just mentioned in terms of I think it was my colleague Councilor Brady just want to kind of get the breakdown in terms of what we thought, but I appreciate that, and of course I come from it as someone who went to the public schools, and my kids went to the public schools, that I'm just passionate about it. So I know folks get fired up from time to time when I will phrase something sort of chronically, but the fact of the matter is I created Boston Year 13 out of frustration that we boast the best colleges and universities in the world, but not enough of our kids, our BPS kids, get to go to those schools. In fact, many of those that have the ability to go to college, many of them are home after their first semester. So we need to do a better job of not just that kid comes across the stage with his or her diploma, which is great. It's a great moment. It's a hugs and a high five moment. But we as a city, we've never tracked those kids. And I know that Councilor Worrell is doing the cradle pipeline piece, which is excellent. We need to do better than just having that kid come across the stage with a high school diploma, particularly when we boast of the best college universities, particularly when CEOs are moving their company here. And again, my frustration is that we need to have a curriculum that matches Boston's economy. So, but again, I think we're all on the same page here. We all want the best product. We want to produce the best for our students, and that's the goal here. So I want to make sure we all stay focused on that, whether we use a particular adjective or not, or we're more passionate or heated up. I need my fire and smoke alarm to be going off here. So, but anyways, that's it. Good to see you, Senator, and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. I think that is it there before we head over to public testimony. Then I'll give folks a chance after public testimony on this to speak. If you are here for public testimony, I'm going to ask that you stay to 2 minutes, that you state your full name, that you state where you reside, and if you represent an organization, that you state that as well, and that you speak and stay on the subject that we are actually speaking about today, which is the elected school committee or the school committee in general. And so I'm going to go in that order. We're going to go in order of signing up for public testimony. If you have signed up for public testimony, great, you're on this list. If you haven't, please email ccc.go@boston.gov, and we will bring you in and do it that way. Kerry, I think you're doing public comment. I'm going to ask that you bring folks in one at a time, not three at a time. If they're already here, fine, but don't just bring everybody in, please. Allow me to call folks in, and so it makes it easier for me to see who's here and do it in that order. Councillor Flynn, I see you have your hand raised if you wanted to do something before we head it off to.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one question. I apologize for taking up any time from the public, but if we do receive, if BPS is under receivership, what will the communication be like with the new school committee, elected school committee, and the receivership and the superintendent? Have in the city council in May, have we thought about that? Just something to think about. If it is under receivership, how will the new school committee deal with the new receivership and the superintendent?
That'll be something that we'd have to see if we're under receivership. I know that Lawrence, for instance, has been under receivership for almost a decade now, if not a full decade, with an elected school committee. And so, I think it works its way through that process, essentially the same way. We'll just have to cross that. I would hope that we aren't under receivership. Certainly we should not be under receivership. But if we are under receivership, we'll have to sort of cross that bridge when we get to it. I think it's again, another good question, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with Sharon Hinton. If you are here, Sharon, I'm going to go ahead and set up my timer. If you'll humor me while I get that set up so that we keep everybody at the same time. Once we hit 2 minutes, you're going to get muted at the 2-minute mark. Just to keep it, we have a long list today for public testimony, which I'm grateful for everybody who cares about our schools and is taking this time out to say something. So I'm going to give you the 2, and then you will hear the timer go off, and we will go to the next person. If you could start with name, where you live, affiliation, if any, and then right into your testimony. The floor is yours, Ms. Hinton.
Thank you. I'm Sharon Hinton, mother of a BPS graduate, former BPS student and employee, educator, community advocate, executive director of Black Teachers Matter, and a Hyde Park homeowner. I heard comments today talking about timing, the timing of the superintendent leaving, timing of the DESE school takeover, timing of the elected school committee, and if she should wait for the mayor to do what she thinks is best. Let me just say, you make time for what's important to you. In some situations, timing is everything. Superintendent Casellius didn't attend this morning's city council on the DESE receivership because she was at the dentist, and neither did Mayor Wu. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from the Birmingham jail talked about why we can't wait. 99,000 voters have stated we want an elected school committee and no longer want to wait. There is no successful model of a hybrid school committee in any urban school system the size of Boston. Boston has had an elected school committee in varying numbers until 1991, an appointed school committee for several decades under several different administrators, and a revolving door of superintendents. The pending DESE MOU is a testament to the results of that failed venture at the expense of parents, students, and teachers. If the DESE receivership goes through and the Boston School Committee is elected, DESE receivership will take over governance and operation of the Boston School Department and further disenfranchise and marginalize parents, teachers, and students. Elected officials, I'm almost finished. Elected officials know what happens when they don't listen to the people that put them in office. So they show up and listen and are held accountable. It's time that people who are calling the educational shots come out of the shadows and are held accountable in the light. We stand with the other members of the Educational Advocacy Coalition in calling for a fully elected school committee as the largest city and capital of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, despite the messiness of campaign finance, despite undue outside influence, and despite all the other situations involving democracy, because democracy is messy, but democracy is what this country is about and is founded on. Voting is an essential part of democracy, and how dare we say voters can't decide who governs other elected offices, and know who runs their children's schools, and now can't govern who runs their children's schools. If we have a school committee, when we have a school committee, Why shouldn't we have an elected school committee? Massachusetts established public education and led the country in 1635. Let's lead the country and return to a fully elected school committee in 2022 and beyond. Chicago is not the model. Chicago was forced to go back to an elected school committee when Mayor Lightfoot wanted it to still be appointed, and there has now been a class action lawsuit in Chicago filed by the 12,000 Black teachers who were forced out of the system when it was appointed. Thank you very much for having this hearing, and I appreciate your listening.
Thank you, Ms. Hinton. Next, we have Dan French.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead and start your minutes.
Okay, my name is Dan French. I'm speaking as a JP resident, father of a BPS grad, board president of Citizens for Public Schools, and member of Bostonians for an elected school committee. We've now had 30 years of a history of an appointed school committee, and BPS has made little progress in eliminating institutional policies that result in gross inequities in opportunity and access for students of color, English learners, and students with disabilities to quality education under mayoral control. We've seen a rapid succession of superintendents contributing to district upheaval. We've endured a school committee in which members are beholden to the wishes of one person, the mayor, with important decisions being made behind closed doors. Last November, Boston voters spoke loud and clear, with almost 4 out of 5 voters saying they want an elected school committee. The referendum garnered 50% more votes, 99,000, than did Mayor Wu, with 65,000 votes, winning in every ward and precinct. The city council and mayor should respect the will of the people. Up until this point, the mayor has refused to meet with a coalition, Bostonians for an elected school committee. As someone who voted for Mayor Wu, she needs to engage the community. Staying on the sidelines is one more example of why we need a fully elected school committee. And by the way, there's zero evidence that hybrids are an effective model. An elected school committee is a fundamental democratic and civil right in one of the most racially and language diverse communities in the state. Boston is the only city or town in which voters are denied the right to democratically elected school committee members. It is no coincidence that this is occurring in a district enrolling 85% students of color, one more way of disenfranchising historically marginalized groups. It's time to restore that right. I urge the city council and mayor to expedite the process of designing a new elected school committee structure in 2022 that ensures representation and accountability, including a student rep on the committee, and make this a top priority to ensure that home rule petition moves from City Hall to the State House in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. French. Next is Mary Battenfield.
Hi, and good afternoon. I'm Mary Battenfeld, Jamaica Plain resident, mother of 3 recent BPS graduates, and a member of the grassroots parent group Quality Education for Every Student. Thank you for holding this hearing and for listening. Other than rooting for the Sox, Bruins, Celtics, and Patriots, it's hard to find things that Bostonians agree on. But in November, from every square in the city, Maverick to Codman to Nubian to Sullivan to Eggleston to Oak to Kenmore, voters said in a loud, clear, and unified voice, we don't want the mayor to pick our school committee. Virtually no evidence supports claims that appointed school boards help improve schools. But lots of evidence shows, as Professor Domingo Morel of Rutgers University has said, that takeovers are unequivocally disempowering to local communities. Research also shows appointed governance systems are racialized, imposed on and against the wishes of communities of color. To be sure, there are barriers to a diverse representative school committee under a fully elected system, but the answer isn't full or partial disenfranchisement under a dubious and disingenuous hybrid structure. It's to implement procedures such as district rather than citywide seats, on-year election cycles, public financing, and voting for undocumented residents that create a more equal electoral playing field. To questions raised about whether now is the time, yes, it is. This is the city council and this is the mayor that can make it happen. The superintendent search only underscores the need to change the current system. Picking a superintendent is technically the school committee's charge, but under mayoral control, mayors really hire and fire superintendents, creating instability. Please stop disempowering and disenfranchising us under the guise of mayoral accountability. Mayors and city councilors have power, platforms, and tools to shape BPS policies, from putting the superintendent on a cabinet to budgetary power to appointing advisory committees. We have nothing but 2 minutes of public comment to a school committee we didn't choose. You can fix that. Advance the home rule petition, the wishes of Boston residents, and democracy now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Badenfield. Next is Roberto Jimenez.
Good afternoon. My name is Roberto Jimenez. I live in Chelsea, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Boston Teachers Union, which was a member of the Bostonians for an Elected School Committee Coalition. Over the years, many of our members have been frustrated with the lack of accountability that the appointed Boston School Committee has to the people of Boston, particularly to students and parents. And therefore, we are fully in support of an elected school committee and ask that the City Council engage fully with this topic, design a school committee structure that is truly and directly accountable to the people of Boston, and send that home rule petition to the mayor. We also ask Mayor Wu to support the will of the people, sign the home rule, and send it to the legislature for approval. This morning, the City Council held a hearing on BPS receivership because the State Department of Education has initiated a process that could result in BPS being placed under state receivership or some different version of state takeover, such as an empowerment zone. State takeovers are the ultimate form of anti-democratic school governance, since it silences community voices, disempowers workers, and takes local control off the table. Meanwhile, in November, the people of Boston proclaimed that they wanted more democracy in our schools. More than 99,000 Bostonians voted to support a fully elected school committee, and the BTU stands in support of this mandate to City Hall. One of the biggest challenges we've seen across the country in school board elections is the emergence of dark money groups that seek to elect folks who support privatization efforts, taking away collective bargaining rights, and reducing community input in decision-making. One of the best design choices we can make to reduce the impact of dark money from any group is to have a district-based school committee. Smaller districts allow candidates to truly engage with the community in order to get elected. After all, it's much easier to engage a district of about 75,000 people rather than a city of 675,000. A second benefit is that different parts of our city can elect representatives from their own communities, which ensures representation for as many people as possible. We're also fully in support of the student representative to the school committee having a vote. The State Board of Education has a student member, they can vote. We don't believe there's any good reason to withhold the student vote. Beyond this, I want to mention that this is an issue about who our schools should be accountable to. Right now, they're not accountable to the people of the city. They're accountable to only one person, the mayor. This is unique among all municipalities in Massachusetts, and it's due to backlash decades ago to people of color gaining power in the school committee with the election of people like John D. O'Brien and Jean McGuire. We should be restoring that power to the people. The mayor will remain a key person in BPS because of the budget power that she has, and an elected school committee would be remiss if they did not engage with her. A real partnership between City Hall and the school district, however, requires the school committee to remain independent from mayoral control. And I want to really quickly address the idea of hybrid committees. There is no blueprint anywhere for a hybrid committee that has worked, and barely any that have been attempted at all. The people of Boston simply want the same democracy that everyone else in Massachusetts has, and they deserve that. There are times when so-called creative solutions are unnecessary because the simple solution is not only what the people want, but what is right. Democracy is messy, but it's the right thing to do. Lastly, we want to highlight all the work that has gone into gathering community input for what this should look like. If this is to be the people's school committee, then the people need to have a voice in designing this body. For that reason, we've had town halls in multiple languages to engage community, and I just want to say quick thank yous to Councillors Mejia, Arroyo, Lujan, and Flynn for your leadership and partnership in this. We look forward to continuing this work to ensure that Boston has a school committee that is truly and directly accountable to the people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez. Kristen Magnuson is next.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Kristen Magnuson. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I am representing Bostonians for an elected school committee. 30 years after mayoral takeover, the restoration of democratic control over Boston's public schools is long overdue, and we are very pleased to be here discussing this topic with the City Council today. We are, however, deeply disappointed that our mayor is not here today and has not even seen fit to send somebody to talk to us about her stance on this issue. Many voted for our mayor precisely because she had so many detailed and comprehensive policies and proposals. Why not on this issue? Vague statements about mayoral accountability aren't going to be enough here. Our coalition has attempted for months now to meet with the mayor, to discuss the structure of an elected school committee, to hear her position on this issue, and to work together with the city council toward a committee that we can all approve. We have been closed out. This lack of engagement is exactly why we demand an accountable, responsive elected school committee. We have worked long and hard for the overwhelming results we got on question 3, and we are prepared to do it again. Our democratic right to representation is not negotiable. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity now to restore sustainable democratic governments to BPS based on the best available scholarship, public policy expertise, and community input in this public process that Roberto just alluded to, the various town halls and the multiple languages. And again, we'd like to echo those thanks to our various counselors and partner organizations who have helped with that. There were a few themes that we heard over and over again in these meetings. One, people want accountable representation. Mayoral accountability isn't a thing anyone has experienced with appointed school committee members. It's, if anything, appointing the members has served to shield the mayor from that sort of accountability. 2, people want transparency. There is no transparency with appointed members. They get their marching orders privately from the mayor, and then they're able to just put on a show of listening to constituents and deliberating. And 3, people do not want their votes diluted with a hybrid school committee. Why should Boston be the only municipality in Massachusetts where members cannot be entrusted with governance over their own schools? Why do we need a check on the will of the people? What if we were watered down the voters' will for city council? What if there was some sort of higher governmental authority that could take away some of the power that you all have been invested with by the voters? And additionally, as Roberto also alluded to, there are no examples of successful hybrid committees for us to try and work from there. Our campaign has done this research of 30 other comparable urban school systems, same size roughly, 77% of which were elected and 23% appointed. Baltimore is the only city that has a hybrid committee, and they don't work for us to study from because they are literally just now adding elected members this year to what was previously a fully appointed board. Let's rebuild trust with our communities, with a school committee that's been shaped by their input. Let's make the choice to act on our democratic values and fully restore the transparency, accountability, and voting rights desired to the residents of Boston, and not reserve a slice of that electoral power out of the people's hands. We call on the City Council and the Mayor to engage with us in the work of defining the structure of an elected Boston School Committee, and to work to approve the home rule petition, restoring our right to elect our school committee without delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Magnuson. Next is Lauren Margarita.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I cannot figure out how to turn on my camera. So I guess I won't bother. Hi, everybody. Thank you, City Council, for holding this important hearing. My name is Laura Margarita, and I live in Rosendale. I'm also a member of the Boston Coalition for Education Equity and campaign with Bostonians for an Elected School Committee, the coalition behind the Yes on 3 campaign, which won in a landslide in November. My 3 children have attended 6 Boston public schools over the past 14 years. One of them is currently a junior at Boston Ed Academy. For their entire BPS education and that of their peers, the Boston Public Schools have been governed by a school committee solely appointed by the mayor. In 1989, the ballot question that asked Bostonians if they wanted to move from an elected school committee to an appointed model won by just 1.5% of the vote. 1.5% is barely a majority, and yet that vote led to the creation of the current system whereby the mayor gets to decide who sits on the school committee. Parents and guardians of children who attend BPS, these stakeholders don't get to decide, nor do Boston voters. For the past 30 years, our schools have been governed under this model, and Bostonians are ready for a change. In stark contrast to 1989, 99,000 Bostonians in every precinct and every ward in Boston voted in November to restore the right to elect our school committee. 79% of Bostonians who voted in that election want this right returned to the people. This is not just a schools issue. Having an elected school committee is a fundamental voting rights issue and a civil rights issue. Excuse me. I too urge the mayor to engage in detail on this issue with both the public and the City Council to expedite the process of designing a new school committee structure that ensures representation and accountability. I request that the Mayor make this a top priority for the next 3 weeks to ensure the Home Rule petition moves from City Hall to the State House in a timely manner. On a personal note, I have lived in Boston for 25 years, but have only been a citizen for the past 9. The reason I decided to apply for citizenship after all that time was so that I could vote, literally for no other reason. Since becoming a citizen 9 years ago, I voted in every municipal, state, and presidential election. I take my right to vote very seriously. And so to Mayor Wu, I'm asking that you also take every Bostonian who voted in November to elect their school committee just as seriously. It's been my pleasure to vote for you in every election you've run in, including for mayor. Now your supporters and constituents expect you to show that you respect the democratic process and honor the votes of 99,000 Bostonians who would like to choose who represents them on the Boston School Committee. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Margarita. Next is Jorge Mendoza.
Hi, how are you? My name is Jorge Mendoza. I'm the parent of 3 public school graduates. And I'd like to mention that although many of on the panel have spoken about the needs of our Black and brown children, these school problems are affecting everybody. The common denominator is poverty, and the poor neighborhoods are suffering the most. I believe that at a time where the mayor has had so much backlash on her on what she's proposing the city embarks in, we keep the school committee to an all-elected committee that's committed by the citizenship, those that overwhelmingly voted to have that right. And since we've tried everything else for many, many years, and proof is in the pudding, the system has failed our children. It is time for change, and it's time for a rapid change. We do not need to face these things slowly over the years. That will handicap the effectiveness, and it would also silence the voice of the people. We, the people, have spoken, and it is necessary at this point to carry on with an all-elected school committee that will help all our children from all walks of life in the city of Boston achieve their goals. The real wealth of the city is the strength of its citizenship. The citizenship has proven in the last election by an enormous margin that they do want a school committee that's elected. They've also shown by their testimony during these meetings on how well prepared they are on the issues and how much more input they have that are elected officials that have many more other issues to deal with that are politically charged. Okay, so school system and embrace the opinion of parents through their vote. Positions that we can actually encourage to serve our neighborhoods, and we can go back to a system that serves the citizenship, not serves itself from it. Thank you very much. George Mendoza from the North End.
Thank you, Ms. Mendoza. Next, we have Catherine Vitale.
Hi, I just wanted to say that I was a little bit confused about the direction that this hearing was heading, because I thought that we were going to be talking about the actual phase-in process and not the fact that we do need an elected committee. So I just want to reiterate what George just said. We do need an elected committee. We need it now. I don't understand the reason for the phase-in process over the next 4 years. I think that, you know, once again, the people have spoken and the elections should be scheduled now. We should have an elected school committee now. There's no reason to wait. A hybrid model clearly hasn't worked anywhere else, and we don't need it here either. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Vitale. Hishan Berentz.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Amazing, thank you. Good evening. My thanks to you, Councillors Arroyo and Mejia, for bringing forward this issue on behalf of the residents of Boston at City Council, and to the vast majority of Boston voters for speaking with a clear and definitive voice to overturn a glaring, decades-old civil rights wrong. I too am interested in the process of how this could be implemented. However, my comments really have to go back, unfortunately, to reiterating the will of the people must be followed, because unfortunately, many of our leadership seem to be backtracking on their commitment to the democratic process. My name is Hesham Berens Wiramuni. I'm a BPS parent and a Jamaica Plain resident. I'm a former co-chair of the Citywide Parent Council representing the 38,000 families of BPS, a former member of the Boston School Committee's Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force, and former City Council staff when I was City Councillor, Tito Jackson's senior education advisor when the councillor served as on this honorable body as its chair of education. Happy birthday, Councillor Jackson, by the way. My two BPS children also have had 7 mayor-appointed superintendents during their time in BPS, hardly what I would call a glowing recommendation for an appointed school committee model. So I'm here today to ask you all to support the clear and overwhelming will of the people who voted overwhelmingly for an elected Boston School Committee rather than the presented appointed body. And by an overwhelming majority, I will repeat again, I mean overwhelming. 255 precincts out of 255 precincts voted, 999,088 votes to reclaim our right to an elected school committee. That's almost 8,000 votes more than Mayor Wu, who I supported, received, who unfortunately seems to be sadly engaging in bad faith efforts in not addressing this voter suppression question, which for me is really quite astounding given the rest of her platform that I fully support. Let us also not forget that almost 29,000 more votes were garnered for this particular question than Mayor Walsh received in 2017. No one can argue that this was a landslide election result, almost unmatched in recent memory. No one can argue that this is not a mandate. They understand that there's a great wrong that needs to be corrected. Boston voters are barred from reclaiming our right to vote for our own school committee. Of the 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts, we still remain the only place where we're not allowed to determine who gets to sit on our school committee. When our democratic system is under so much attack at this moment in history, Boston can only once again step forward and do what is just and wise. Let me remind everyone that an elected school committee is nothing new. Don't forget that Massachusetts alone, there are approximately 2,500 other elected school committee members. Many, like Tracy Novak of the Worcester School Committee, are trusted, respected educational experts throughout both the Commonwealth and nationally. We also talk all we want about voter suppression in Georgia, in Texas, in Florida, or Mississippi, but right here in Boston, the cradle of democracy, for the past 30 years, citizens of color and poor white citizens have been locked out of being able to do exactly what our neighbors in Newton, Brookline, Cambridge, Somerville, Wellesley, and Weston take for granted as their basic rights. Let us not allow a few overwhelmingly white, self-appointed elites to undercut the democratic voices of 99,088 voters. And to both Councillors Mayhew and Flynn's earlier points about the charter school industry wishing to buy candidates for the school committee, first, I'd like to echo what Councillor Mayhew said about people power overcoming the power of money. And second, unfortunately, there is a present member of the appointed school committee, appointed recently by a previous mayor, whose own position is deeply funded by the charter school industry. Parents like myself had absolutely no way to voice our deep, deep concerns for such a huge conflict of interest. But under the sunshine of the electoral process, the hundreds of thousands of Boston's residents in different districts will be able to hold any charter cash flushed candidate to account, just as they overwhelmingly did in 2016 by rejecting that year's anti-democratic charter school ballot question. I have served.
Thank you. We're a little bit past 2 minutes now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tanya Tedesco. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, councilors, for hosting this. My name is Tanya Tedesco. I am a resident of West Roxbury. I am also an organizer with Showing Up for Racial Justice. I am speaking on behalf of myself, but for years I was very present at the school committee meetings, regularly testified, went to community meetings, was present at multiple school closings, community discussions, and they don't listen. The only time I witnessed them listen was when a large group of white parents, mostly from West Roxbury, Charlestown, and Southeast, showed up about the start times. Did the school committee react? At that point, I decided that my time and energy would be better served helping get more people elected to the city council that would help move forward the agenda of the people of Boston. We hear all the time, and Massachusetts people, mostly white liberals, are known to throw shade at the South about getting out and voting. Go vote, go vote. Small issues, big issues, go vote. We voted, we've said what we want, deeply disappointed that the mayor is dragging her feet in supporting this. We should be able to move this forward much faster. I appreciate the diligence that you are doing in community work. But I want to say that there is no reason that Boston should be lagging so far behind. And I appreciate the concerns that have been raised, and I know that they have been countered. But the vast majority of the concerns that have been raised, as Krista mentioned a few minutes ago, they could apply to the city council, they could apply to Congress, they could apply to any elected board or council or committee. Should we do half? Can we trust the voters? It applies to everything. There's no reason we should single out the elected school committee. So I want to let you all know that I am here to help move this forward, to help advance this with the mayor. I am not sure what the hesitancy is. I am deeply concerned that she has not responded to the elected school committee group that has been trying for months to get to meet with her. That is deeply disappointing, and I appreciate all the work that all of you are doing to move this forward. Let's just try and move it a little faster if we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tedesco. Next, we have Naomi Hastings.
Hi, thank you for holding this tonight. Just going to piggyback, I guess, on what other people have said so eloquently. We, the people, voted for an elected committee, and it is disappointing to see the mayor, dragging her feet on this. 4 years is unreasonable. Do I think, yes, people should have time to campaign? Yes, but 4 years is too long. We need to get this going and get this going now. This was bipartisan. The whole city, left, didn't matter whether you're left or right. Everyone overwhelmingly voted to push this through. So it's time for the mayor to start listening to her constituents. As a Boston school parent, I'm so disappointed in the school system. I'm so disappointed in the school committee with all the scandals, even surrounding, everything that was happening with the exam schools. There is a lack of trust. And when we are able to put in us and our constituents, I think there will be more accountability. I am in favor of having students as part of the committee. I do think our children's voices need to be heard as well. But again, we need to get the ball rolling. A 4-year phase-in is just ridiculous and cannot happen. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Hastings. who is next? Is it Travis Marshall?
Good afternoon. My name is Travis Marshall. I live in Rosendale. I'm a parent of 2 Boston Public School students. When voters overwhelmingly supported a return to an elected school committee, we demanded voice and representation. Over decades of mayoral control, student and family voice has often gone unheard. Each year, students, teachers, and caregivers appear before the mayor's school committee to plead for budgets to be spared, to demand a voice in their school's future, and even to beg for their school community's survival. These frequent testimonies are heart-wrenching, but almost never impact policy. Inadequate budgets lead to cuts in staffing and programs, and the committee gives away property to well-connected players, and buildings are left to crumble until they are condemned and school communities are scattered. Why does this cycle continue year after year? Because the structure of our school governance is based on mayoral politics, not as a democratic channel for Bostonians. Past mayors felt safe to disinvest from BPS behind the cover of an appointed school committee because there's no one representing the voice of BPS stakeholders. Mayors and city councilors are elected for many different reasons, and the scope of your offices is broader than just representing the interests of BPS students and families. We need what every other municipality in the Commonwealth has, democratic representation to be our voice. I'm sensitive to the desire for expertise in education policy that appointed seats may allow for, but that argument ultimately rests on credentialism. We've already seen that no amount of scholarship can bridge the rift between policymakers and the people when there's no accountability. The very same voters that elected this city council cast more votes for an elected school committee than any candidate on the ballot. So if we trust democracy for your seats, we should trust it for BPS. And I appreciate all the work you've done on this, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Michael, I believe, is next. Floor is yours.
Mike Heisman, Dorchester, Beja. The Boston City Council, elected by and responsible to the citizens of Boston, is often the form of local government that provides the strongest support for quality public education in our city. The unelected Boston School Committee, appointed and accountable by the mayor, is unaccountable to the citizens of Boston. This is an important reason why it often does a poor job of running our school system. Earlier today, the City Council had a hearing that addressed the threat of future hostile DESE takeover of our schools. When has the unelected school committee discussed and taken action against this threat? The answer is never. Why should the citizens of Boston have an elected school committee? Every other municipality in our state has one. Why should we be denied? Last November, the citizens of Boston overwhelmingly voted in favor of an elected school committee. Why should the city council deny the will of the people? When the unelected and unaccountable school committee has been ineffective, the community has only the power to complain. School committees are responsible for the hiring and firing of the superintendent. The unelected school committee gave Dr. Caselius an excellent evaluation and extended her contract. Mayor Wu just fired our superintendent and paid her a lot of money not to work in Boston next year. No legitimate, non-BS reason was given. You can't do that with an elected school committee. And if any of you don't support an elected school committee, please explain why you support having an elected city council. Be consistent and support a city council appointed by the mayor. It would be cheaper. If any of you support a hybrid school committee, be consistent and support hybrid city council. Please resign and ask Mayor Wu to appoint your replacement. The mayor of Boston has plenty of power and responsibility. I support your decision to give yourself more control over the city's budget. That move was democratic. In a democracy, the mayor is not the boss. Responsibility and power must be shared. If you believe in democracy, you will support an elected school committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of our folks who have waited to give public testimony today. Thank you. Pam, you are next.
Okay.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Pam Coker. I'm the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and I am also a city resident. I wanted to simply share a couple of comments specific to past experience with elected school committee governance. Past elected school committee government structures did not ensure financial responsibility or accountability. Elected school committees could and did spend well beyond mayor and council authorized spending. Between 1978 and 1991, the fully elected committee ran a deficit in 11 out of those 14 years. What we do need, in addition to whatever school committee governance model the city moves forward with, we need a thoughtful, fiscally responsible accountability structure as part of any and every school committee governance model considered for implementation. If a change in governance does not also establish school committee fiscal accountability, then additional school budgeting controls need to be established. We cannot, at this point, lose any revenue and resources, and we need some thoughtful budgeting and financial accountability, whether it's from the school committee or from another entity that oversees school finance choices and decision-making. And I do note, though, I'm not necessarily endorsing at this moment a fully elected school committee, a hybrid model, or any other model at this moment. But whichever school committee model or variation Boston has, clearly the focus needs to be on preparing our Boston Public School students for their futures, including career and/or college, and providing the resources to do so. We urge you to take these factors into consideration as this process moves forward. Thank you.
It wouldn't be virtual hearing if I didn't mute myself one time. Thank you very much. And we have one last public comment from Anthony Crossan.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Anthony Crossan, member of the NAACP Boston branch, concerned resident here in Boston, and I have a little princess in BPS. Thank you, Councillor Arroyo and Mejia, for your leadership on this very important issue. Also, shout out to Neysaj and Susan and Dianne and others who spoke so passionately this morning. In November, 99,000 or 78% of voters voted yes to an elected school committee. And this was a big win for justice and for freedom. And this yes was a loud voice and a fist in the air shouting yes to democracy and no to the divisions in our education system. Yes to equity and no to a wider, more pronounced gap due to a pandemic. And yes to a future where our youth are most prepared and no to unfair practices lacking community voice. I stand behind efforts that support an elected school committee in a time that we need it most. We understand that receivership disproportionately affects students of color and the health, wealth, and wellness of Black and brown residents of Boston. An elected school committee also speaks to the reparations which are paramount to true freedom. And that has three really main components: acknowledgement, redress, and closure. A receivership overlooks the inequities that continue to widen these education gaps. It silences and disempowers the 99,000 voters who advocated for this cause, and this is not acknowledgement. Redress makes right what was wrong. It corrects the injustice that allowed racial practices in the front door of our school system and took power from Black and brown people in Boston. And to make this right, we must protect and promote the elected school committee now. And I cannot overstate that closure cannot be achieved if we do not protect this elected school committee. We have to demonstrate that the pain of the past can be overcome with the power today. Thank you for your time, but most importantly, thank you for hearing the voices of the people today, and thank you for your commitment to justice and freedom.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to allow the councilors who are still here, if they would like to give a closing, starting with Councillor Mejia.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo, and thank you to everyone who testified, both through public testimony and our panelists. It is quite clear that change can't wait. As Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley says, those closest to the pain should be closest to the power, and no more power is greater than being able to elect the people who are going to represent us on the school committee. So I'm just incredibly encouraged. I think that this moment in regards to what it calls for, it is for us to lean in and act swiftly. I think that it is, it's loud and clear that we can't keep dragging our feet when it comes to this issue. And I look forward to the working session and more importantly, making sure that those folks who went out to the polls in November know that we're here to bring it home. So thank you so much, Councillor Arroyo, for your leadership in the space. And a big shout out to the Yes on 3 Coalition and all the advocates who've worked so hard on that ballot initiative, because if it wouldn't have been for them, we probably wouldn't be having this robust conversation today. So thank you, Yes on 3, for your hard work and leadership in this space and moving democracy forward. Thank you. And one vote does matter, y'all. So just don't let money scare you. We got this.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Dianne, if you have any closing statements.
Yeah, just want to say thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding this hearing, especially for the new councilors, and thank you to the advocates. Boston voters spoke loud and clear, and I'm excited to see what we can do and how swiftly we can do it here on the Boston City Council to make an elected school committee a reality, to bring democracy to the people, to really realize shared power in determining the outcomes for our young kids, with them in the lead, also as members of the school committee. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Dianne. I think we have one more person who's going to testify, Lisa Jean Graff.
Hello, my name is
Hello,
Lisa.
good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. My name is Lisa Jean Graff. I am a Boston Public Schools parent who lives in the Fenway. I'm here to share my excitement for the next steps of Boston achieving a fully elected school committee. Having an elected school committee is fundamentally a voting rights issue and a civil rights issue. The residents of this city are ready for a change on this issue. There is a forward momentum that is thrilling to witness and be part of. There are times when Boston is on the right side of history, and it is a hopeful thing to witness. City councilors and Mayor Michelle Wu, I look forward to your supporting this change and having this change be part of your personal Boston legacy. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. And that is our final public comment. And so we are now adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time, for your patience, for your participation. It means a lot to this process. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.